Welcome everyone to Your Ghana, My Ghana. We're on Graphic Online TV's YouTube channel and my name is Dede Amano Wilkes. In this episode, we're reflecting on Ghana's revolutionary past and drawing lessons for today. And we're joined in the studio by three veteran activists who were part of the student movement in the early 1980s. They are Dr. Yao Graham, former Publicity Secretary of the New Democratic Movement, Dr. Nicholas Atambugre, who was Coordinating Secretary of NUGS from 1979 to 1981 and was a founding member of the June 4th movement, and Kwesi Agblé, a founding member of the Socialist Revolutionary League of Ghana, the Movement on National Affairs, and People's Heritage Party, which became the current CPP. Welcome to you.
Thank you very much.
But before we begin our conversation, here's a short video documentary to provide some context. In 1957, Ghana gained independence with a per capita GDP slightly higher than South Korea's, but the paths these two nations took would diverge dramatically. Under General Park Chung-hee's leadership, South Korea implemented a series of state-led economic policies that propelled it to become one of East Asia's miracle economies. Meanwhile, in Ghana, Kwame Nkrumah's vision for a prosperous nation was cut short when he was overthrown in a CIA-orchestrated coup in 1966. Today, South Korea's per capita GDP stands at more than $32,000, while Ghana's is a little over $2,000. What went wrong? The East Asian economic miracle is often touted as a market success story, but it was more accurately a result of state interventionism and state autonomy. General Park's government provided generous subsidies to chaebols, drove industrialization, and developed strategic industries like shipbuilding. In contrast, Nkrumah's attempts to impose discipline on Ghana's economy were denounced as dictatorship. When Flight Lieutenant Jerry Rawlings came to power on 31st December 1981, Ghana had another chance to curate its own development model, but the revolution was divided and the economy faced severe challenges. The country faced its worst trials from drought and bushfires to the expulsion of 1 million Ghanaians from Nigeria. The instability this created was compounded by a series of coup attempts. In August 1983, the PNDC signed an IMF agreement marking a shift in Ghana's economic trajectory. Rawlings would go on to rule for 20 years, winning elections and hearts, but economic transformation has continued to elude the country. Today in Burkina Faso, Captain Ibrahim Traoré represents a new generation of strong men. Can he learn from Ghana's extraordinary experience and develop a new model of development? The story of Ghana's rise and fall offers valuable lessons for nations seeking to forge their own path to development. Yao Graham, let's start with you. What were your expectations when Jerry Rawlings first came to power, and how did your views evolve over time?
I was not in Ghana at the time of June 4th. I was actually outside studying.
You were doing a PhD at that time?
I was doing my master's.
Okay.
79. And, but I've been part of the student movement because it was during the time when university that whole kind of ferment came along. And by the time I left Ghana, the whole movement against Unigov had begun to land at a place where the Akufo government was keen to try and organize a transition to elections. But even at that time, it was clear that there was a split. I mean, the middle classes were quite happy to have elections, but the students and workers were quite disaffected by the failure to punish those who had damaged the country. So I was not surprised, although nobody knew Jerry Rawlings. At May 15th. So when June 4th, but May 15th made him popular. And when the AFRC came to power, the things that they announced, as I listened to them outside the country, reflected a lot of the demands that ordinary people had made in terms of accountability for the destruction of the economy and also the traditions of abuse of power. So in that period, one felt that some of the issues that had been raised earlier, which had become marginalized in the rush to elections, had come back to the fore.
And your views evolved over time. Would you say that the challenges were more complex than anticipated?
Well, I mean, the FRC never intended to stay long in power, and it left. And the Liman government coming to power, it's kind of was changed the constitutional regime, shall we say. I mean, in that period, when I went on to the UK as a student, the legacy of June 4th, in terms of a certain radicalization of politics, was influential in terms of the agenda that some of us who set up the Ghana People's Solidarity Organization in London took on board. The whole thing about keeping alive some of the issues raised by June 4th, which connected with the earlier demands of the mass movement, was very much part of the agenda of GAPSO. And we established relations with the emergent left organizations in Ghana, the June 4th movement, the New Democratic Movement, so as to be connected and part of what was happening in Ghana. So the influence was in terms of the fact that even some of us who were outside felt the need to organize and connect with the organizations in Ghana who were giving organizational expression to a more radical, more popular notion, progressive notion of politics in the country.
And it was sufficiently exciting for you to abandon your PhD studies temporarily and come to Ghana to support.
Well, that was in 82.
Mm-hmm.
That was in 82.
Yeah.
I mean, but I was in Ghana in 81. I came back to Ghana in 81 doing field work for my PhD. Mm-hmm. And during that period, that's when I got to know got involved with virtually all the left organizations that were on the ground. I mean, some close friends of mine were in the leadership of the June 4th movement. I knew key people in the New Democratic Movement. So during the latter part of the Third Republic, whilst I was in Ghana doing my field work, I spent a lot of time attending the meetings of these organizations and getting a feel of the way that things were developing, because it connected very much also with the mandate I was given by GAPSO to build relations with these groups in Ghana. So 31st December occurred, and these two organizations that I was close to decided to basically support the coup. I then took a decision also to stay in the country and joined the New Democratic Movement at that point. So I joined the New Democratic Movement in 82, but in the period before that, I was connected with both the JFM and the New Democratic Movement.
Yes, so there was a lot of excitement during that period about the prospects for a socialist revolution. Let's talk for a moment about
I don't know about the socialist revolution.
Okay,
You know,
all right.
I think, but we can. I mean, because there was a lot of excitement about a progressive project, and these organizations had all built their platforms about what they wanted. So when the coup occurred, they broadly saw it as an opportunity to advance a progressive project. I'll put it broadly that way, because I mean, all of them had their own platforms and their vision of what to do in the period.
And Kwesi Agbe, how do you see that question, considering that one of your movements specifically had the word socialist revolutionary in its name?
Yes. Well, the Socialist Revolutionary Youth League
of
Ghana. June 4th, there are several narratives about June 4th, depending on which side of the
ideological debate.
Yeah, and which side within that June 4th movement itself, there were serious contradictions in terms of the ideology of the players. You'll recollect that Jerry Rawlings himself, who came to symbolize the June 4th revolution, was actually in jail.
At the time
At the
of
time.
the revolution.
Yeah, so there were comrades of his. And the military was almost in tatters due to years of moving into government. And there were very professional soldiers who didn't think it was their business to be in politics. They wanted to be soldiers. That's what they are trained to be. So there was that push and pull within the military itself, which led to a series of palace coups leading up to Akufo and the pressure on Akufo to hand over. And Jerry Rawlings started his May 14th. He was arrested.
May 15th.
May 15th was arrested. My mom's birthday is 14th. So,
So that is more important.
so there was that push and pull. And there were different perspectives. There were two key figures who played out in June 4th at the time. One was Jerry Rawlings and his best man at his wedding, Wachijan.
Yeah.
And part of the motives, and we were very close with Wachijan as friends, and also because we had an ideological group where we studied and debated and stuff like that. So we knew both of them and the friendship that existed between them. And part of the reason why June 4th happened on that date was to save a good friend.
To save a good friend?
Yes, because he would have been executed.
Okay, all right. Okay.
In a day or two, which precipitated the action to occur on June 4th. And Wachijan has said it before. They had set up their command post in Achimota Forest. And then they sent people to go and release him. But there were all kinds of forces at play, in the army, different groups, everyone plotting, so.
Hence a series of coup attempts.
Yes, so when they released him, the instruction was to bring him to the command post in Achimota Forest. But they released him and straight to Broadcasting House. So they were all in the bush when they had him on the air. You are either part of the problem or part of the solution. So he was already on the air. That was not planned. It was not plan of the June 4th. Once he came on the air and he already had built up that popularity against the system, they then needed to manage the situation. And because he was not part of those who planned it, but now came to symbolize the June 4th, the deal was Wachijan would be the spokesperson, so he doesn't speak. He's just kind of a figurehead. Unfortunately, things did not go that way. But one thing was key from Wachijan's perspective was to return this country to civilian rule and get the military out of politics and to punish any soldier who had sworn to defend the Constitution but went ahead to break his oath to the Constitution when they were commissioned into the army. So a decision was made to punish any soldier who had done that. And that also accounts in part for why people like Afrifa and the rest who had left the military long ago had to unfortunately end up in the gallows. So one thing about June 4th was to make sure the military never again entered into politics, which is something that is a continuing debate that must guide not only Ghana but other countries in Africa about military involvement in politics.
Very well, but linked to that issue of military involvement, let's look for a moment at the concept of state autonomy. In the video documentary, we saw that Kwame Nkrumah had far less state autonomy in the end than someone like General Park in South Korea, whereas Park was given the latitude to drive industrialization. Kwame Nkrumah, who was implementing similar policies, was overthrown. Nicholas Atampogre, you were a member of the June 4th. Can you reflect on the state autonomy, the kind of state autonomy that a military strongman like Jerry Rawlings had in Ghana? Did we waste the opportunity of having a strongman to drive those policies?
I think to understand the state autonomy within the context of the June 4th, it's important to look much larger than June 4th itself. Somebody like me who was involved from the very beginning, I got into campus in 1975. I was a product of the general ideological reawakening globally and the interest in Pan-African struggles. So therefore, when we were looking at state autonomy, our discussions were very critical of the nature of our economy and society, which had made it so dependent on foreign capital and made it impossible to restructure the economy in such a way that it benefited our people. So therefore, when we got on campus and were involved in Panimo, etc., that was long before June 4th. Our interest was, how are we going to organize and mobilize all the rank and file of the people to do something about this new colonial economy? So you remember when you asked me about state autonomy, I said, wait a minute, we need to agree on what we mean by state autonomy in this case.
Yeah.
Because how autonomous is the Ghanaian state? How autonomous is Nigeria? How autonomous is Burkina Faso? How autonomous is any of the new colonial countries?
And on that question, how crucial is it for African leaders to learn from our experience and assert their autonomy, to give more pushback?
Yes, it's important that we recognize that autonomy is a political project.
Right.
Because we are products of a colonial intervention that restructured our relations with the world. And if we want to have the freedom to reshape our destiny in our own way, it's essentially a political project. And to that extent, until we are able to organize in such a way that we have leaders who are independent minded and thinking and reflect the aspirations of our people, the dream of having autonomy, state autonomy, will go nowhere.
And have we hitherto, in that period in particular, did we underestimate the external forces that would push back against that autonomy?
I wouldn't say we underestimated, but we were optimistic. Yeah? Because I recall on campus then, the mantra then, imperialism is very strong. Don't underestimate what imperialism can do. So we were very much aware of the challenges that we were faced with. But for me, it is important to realize that in every context, there's always a political struggle going on. And the leaders of that struggle, depending on their ideological orientation, their intentions in engaging, will determine the degree to which they are able to make changes to existing relations.
Okay, let's discuss the IMF agreement that was signed during that period in August 1983. Were any of you shocked when the PNDC signed that agreement with the IMF?
I think the Grey will be in a better position to speak to this.
Yeah. But Lady, if you don't mind, I want to pick up a bit on the state autonomy. But I think our Towns has made some very important points. And to build on that, you see, you made a point about strong men. I mean, I don't think that people on our generation, the Ghanaian left, were looking for strong men. We're looking to build popular movements from which leadership would emerge. And whether a person is a strong man or a strong woman, ultimately, they have a base in society which sustains their power. So Park, even though he came from the military, even though he seemed to be relatively autonomous, ultimately, he represented the interests of the Korean bourgeoisie. Because the repression in that period was of popular protest to enable a certain Korean capitalist project.
But that is the whole point. He was allowed that latitude.
No, I wouldn't say.
America allowed that latitude because they were worried about the advance of communism from China after the defeat of Japan in World War II.
I mean, East Asia.
And Nkrumah wasn't given that latitude.
If I can, I'll answer that. I mean, if you have an anti-imperialist project, you cannot expect anti-imperialism to give you latitude. It goes without saying. Park, South Korea, was a creature of American imperialism, created out of the Korean War. So it was important in terms of geopolitics for Korea to be supported. Korea was the bridgehead of anti-communism in the Korean peninsula. There was China there and Russia further up. So, and then there was the Indo-Chinese struggle taking place with all these communists. So if you have an anti-imperialist project, you cannot expect imperialism to give you latitude. You must build a capacity to be able to resist imperialism to proceed.
Hence the movement.
Yes. So the importance, so the comparison of Nkrumah and Park, if you make it a discussion about strong men without a positioning of their political relations to imperialism, then you'll be making a comparison which I think can be misleading. Nkrumah had an anti-imperialist project, not only for Ghana, but for the whole continent, and was part of the whole Bandung thing, and so on and so forth. So imperialism was determined from day one to deal with him. And that goes without saying. But back to the thing about...
Okay, but before you go to the IMF, is that what you're... Let's bring in staying on that question of the strongman. Now we have the strongman in Burkina Faso. Kwesi Agbe, what's your take on what is happening there?
Well, as...
if he weren't a strongman, would he be able to do the things he's doing now, regardless of what his ideology is?
Yeah, well, I wouldn't like or use the word a strong man. Various epochs in history produce people who respond to the dynamics of their own society. And the Burkinabe system for a long time was clear. From the time of Sankara, and even before Sankara, right after independence, I mean, the efforts for Ghana and at the time Upper Volta to form a union among others, the Ghana-Guinea-Mali Mali Union, was not only for those. It was Kwame Nkrumah had a big project, and there were leaders at the time who saw that vision. The French colonial powers will not allow it to happen, but over time, the situation deteriorates, leading to all the Islamic, so-called Islamic terrorism movements and Al-Qaeda and all the stuff. From the June 4th example, and from other examples on this continent, when you have a military that is not backed by a mass movement, at a point it becomes a one-man or 2, 3, 5 men band. And it exposes itself because the enemy is not asleep. They are still doing everything. So if they took him out today, for example, what happens?
Very good.
Then that makes sense to me.
Very good.
Otherwise, I don't see the future.
Very good. Atampugre, you did your PhD on Burkina Faso. How do you see this question? What do we know about the movement surrounding Traoré? Does he have how much is he embedded in the society?
I was explaining to Degree that Burkina Faso is one of the very heavily politicized countries. They have the capacity to form so many political formations, which belies its peasant. Majority of the country is peasant. You see,
what explains that? So Thomas Sankara came out of that.
Yeah, Thomas Sankara came out of that.
Characteristic of Burkina Faso.
Yeah, but Thomas Sankara was a product of work by left political formations who had managed to work with them in their group. They were part of a group that the PIE had formed to continue their political work that they emerged. So the PIE cadres were actively involved in the early days of Sankara until power got into their heads, and some of the PIE cadres themselves got arrested and got thrown out. Now, you see, we talked earlier on about state autonomy, but it's important that we look at political developments in Burkina Faso within the context of the global struggle and French interest in the region, because it has made sure that any force that emerges to threaten their interests essentially gets neutralized.
And in the context when they've made sure that every force gets neutralized, doesn't that mean you need a strong man at some point?
You see, the problem of a strong man assumes that you need only
strong
one
woman.
Only one person. Let's give the devil his due. I haven't met Traoré. I've met Compaoré. Traoré from the social media is very articulate and is kind of articulating the aspirations of a vast majority of people.
From the social media, not just the AI generated.
No, from the social media.
From genuine social media.
From genuine social media. Now, and he's had such an impact in the sub-region. I've been with young people on the frontier, and they are all clamoring. And if you look at what happened when he came here for the
inauguration,
you can see
the excitement.
The excitement that is there. That excitement is there because there was a journey that began in 1983 with Sankara, who was by far more charismatic, very intelligent, very very articulate individual with a very determined agenda. He was killed by his own close friend. Yeah.
Campore.
Yeah. But the kind of spirit that he evoked, the enthusiasm that he evoked, has remained for a very long time in the country. Now, the resurgence has come because of the crisis that the neo-colonial Burkina state has entered. Largely because the civilian elite have joined the looting brigade. The level of corruption, almost everything that you hear in Ghana is also there. So that created a context
For him to emerge.
Now, his advantage is that he emerged from, how would I call it? Let me say other ranks. Yeah, he's not your French military elite trained officers, but he's been at the battlefront with many of the soldiers that have been doing the fighting. So he has a certain element of legitimacy. But in the process, there's a wedge in the military. And my discussions with some of the Burkina friends of mine say that, look, but for external support, he would have been killed by now. Why?
But for external support?
Yes.
From where?
Russia.
Okay.
There's a Russian
Yes.
military brigade that is responsible for his security. But the real problem is that when you are going to undertake a transformative agenda, you must be clear in your mind that the enemies are many. And the way you act and behave is important. Some of the friends that I talked to in Burkina Faso, in fact, very recently, they have gone quiet. I'm trying to find out why, because when I get this AI-generated thing, I send it to them, is this true or false? So they tell me, this is fact, this is fiction, this is a bit of fact, this is exaggerated. So I vet almost all the information that I get. These days, I don't know why they are not as active. One of them complains that it's become so dangerous to be critical that many of them are preferring to keep quiet. That some of them, for being critical of what is going on, have been sent to the battlefront. Now, that brings me to the issue that Kusagli raised. In our search for strong men, we underrate the importance of building genuine democratic movement that represents the people's aspirations. I think that right now, Africa is yearning for a leader. So anything that comes up, we jump up and down without looking, what is the social and political base that informs this thing? It is true that some of the things that he's doing is very progressive, very nationalistic. So even some of the people who disagree with him acknowledge that, yes, there have been important achievements. The real question is this the route that we want to take to transform our various countries? Is this a safe route? Because all it requires is for something to go wrong and Traore is killed. And there's chaos. We must go back and understand exactly what are the social forces that are organizing to support this process. What is their own legitimacy? How can we play a part in ensuring that the people's own representatives emerge as leaders at various levels? Right now, everything is around Traore, and that for me is worrying. I would want to know the political structure and institutions that support this base. I mean, he's managed to mobilize a number of people to volunteer to go to the war front. The casualty rate is still very high. So it raises a number of questions. Where do we go in our struggle for genuine transformation of our continent?
Yes. And so now on that question, let's go back to the question we parked temporarily on the IMF. And it seems like this debate about the IMF will never go away. We had it under Akufo-Addo, we're having it now under Mahama, who seems quite, happy to embrace this IMF program he inherited from a government that said it would do away with the IMF. So we're talking about 1983, when the PNDC signed the IMF agreement in 1983. Did it come as a shock?
It didn't come as a shock to me because it was quite clear that at the time that the Rawlings came the second time, the economy was struggling. And as far as he was concerned, what he needed was cash to be able to keep the economy going. This is on the situation where I was saying that De Grey worked a lot on this economic program.
So let's ask De Grey what he thought about it. Where were we expecting the cash? Were we expecting cash from from Gaddafi? How did we end up signing this agreement with the IMF in the middle of a revolution?
Well,
2 years down the line.
yeah, I think it's not a product only of economic factors. Speaking for myself, and I think many of the comrades on the left, we were heavily focused on politics and not paying a lot of attention to the economy. We knew the economy was bad. I'm talking about the economy in terms of detail. We learned a bit about how bad things were when discussions started taking place in the government about the state of the economy. Now, it's important to take the story back a little bit because the Liman government has started discussions with the IMF for a stabilization program before the coup took place. So some of that work about the economic analysis had been done, which got presented to a meeting of the leading structures of the PNDC. That time, the PNDC itself, the leadership of the defense committees, and the committee of secretaries. And it generated a huge debate.
And this is something extraordinary. Those groups you've mentioned, I mean, how many people have seen that kind of social organization that you experienced drawing, that's part of your living memory? It's quite unique, isn't it?
Yes, but I think the collapse of one leg, the defense committee leg, is also important for what happened. Which I'm saying is not simply a question of economics, but also a question of politics. So this thing was presented, and it generated a huge debate. Now, the central debate was about whether to devalue the currency. Looking at that discussion 40 years on, or even soon after, speaking for myself, it became clear that before that, in Ghana, discussions about devaluation usually are conflated with IMF programs. But when you look at the history of many transformative moments, what you do with your currency has been an important issue.
Like today.
So, for example, after the Civil War in the Soviet Union, they demonetized, look at Zimbabwe. The currency has collapsed and so on. And the situation in Ghana, the exchange rate was in crisis. Prices were like 32 times what they had been previously and so on. So something needed to be done. But the country also needed an economic program within which you situate your monetary policy, your this policy, and so on. So that's what the debate was about. Now, in the wake of that discussion, an alternative program was developed in that discussion. And in fact, in late 1982, Kwesi Botwe announced a program for reconstruction and development as the finance minister, which was more consistent with that alternative program that had been discussed. I'm telling this story in this detail because I think in the wake of the purging of sections of the left in late 82, the overall situation of left influence in the regime was weakened. So some of the colleagues went into exile, some of us remained. Also, Jerry Rawlings became aggressively suspicious and hostile to the left. So the forces that were for an alternative program were actually weakened in that period. By 83, at the time the program was announced, for example, there was not even a coordinating structure for the defense committees. Okay? So the government signed this agreement. Now, I was surprised because I came back to working for the PNDC when the defense committee leadership was reconstituted. And we assumed that the measures there was never an announcement of the IMF agreement in that early 80s until the donor conferences and things started. The thing was still being sold as a nationally generated program. Now, in that ambiguity, you can generate a national program with the IMF, or you can generate a national program which is autonomous. Okay. Increasingly, the split between the PNDC and its defense committee base came to turn on the economic program and its deviation from promises that the government had made. If you go back and look at a speech that Jerry Rawlings made in early '83, a number of promises were made which were inconsistent with the economic program that the government began to implement. And that was also became central to the split between the remnants of the left that were still working with the PNDC and the government, and also the definitive split between the PNDC and the remaining support that he had in the workers' movement. And you could also see that the composition of the regime increasingly became more and more like any old military regime that preceded it. So there was also a reconstitution of the class character of the PNDC in a direction which was more supportive of the relationship with the IMF. So in a certain sense, the PNDC effectively ended up picking up and completing the relationship that had been initiated by the Liman government. And I'd like to add here also that in effect, actually, by the time the PNDC's economic program, which made it the star of the West and of the IMF, was complete, Jerry Rawlings effectively presided over the completion of the dismantling of Nkrumah's project that the NLC has started. So, despite the middle classes disliking Jerry Rawlings, actually, they should erect a statue to him. Because something they've been trying to do through successive regimes, because he was popular with the masses. He had legitimacy, but that legitimacy was actually used to betray the masses.
Seriously.
That's why I'm adding the dimension of politics. So I've said it many times, the greatest hero of the Ghanaian elite actually is not J.B. Dankwa. It's Jerry Rawlings. And the masses who love Jerry Rawlings should be pelleting him with rotten tomatoes.
And Kwesi Agbe, where were you located during that period? Do you have anything to add about the IMF program before?
You don't want to know where I was.
Tell us where you were. Do you have anything to add on the IMF program?
Well, I was in prison at the time.
Okay.
From 82, 5th of February 82, I spent 3 months, grueling months in the guard room in 5th Battalion. And then was eventually transferred to Sawam prisons for another 21 months. So I was...
So sadly you were not part of the debate on the IMF.
I was following the events from behind the walls and whatever news.
Sorry to hear that.
Yes, but we were not surprised because we took a position right from Sri Lanka and Monas. Monas was more of a national democratic movement. Sri Lanka was more Marxist-Leninist in its orientation, pure and simple. And we had taken a position against the 31st December revolution because we saw it as military adventurism. We knew Jerry Rawlings inside out. We knew his extreme right-wing leanings from years back. I mean, we knew ourselves too well. And so we didn't expect, and we knew about the attempt to overthrow the government. We took steps, but I think the military disappointed us. But we remained opposed to it from day one, and we worked to turn it around, to reverse it, which is why we were picked up within a month. Yes. Actually, on that day we were picked up, that would have been the end of that regime. There's no two ways about it. But we ended up in the guard room. Yes, in the guard room and prison. So at least some of us survived.
We were all picked up, you know that.
You're all survivors.
At various times. not so early.
I was the first to go.
When?
November 24th.
Yeah.
82.
Yes, we went February 5th.
82.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we were picked on February 5th. 82.
So, gentlemen, comrades, as we look to the future, What message would you like to convey to the next generation of African leaders and activists?
I would want to tell the next generation of activists and leaders not to lose hope. Every generation has its leaders, and the contradictions will produce the leaders that will represent the interests of the people. All I can say for my generation is that we should spend most of our energy now trying to see whether we can mentor and support the younger generation of leaders who have integrity and have commitment to the interests of the people. There are too many opportunities and fortune seekers that have entered the fray. It's so difficult to find people that are prepared to make the sacrifices that we were making in our time without any support.
Okay, thank you very much. Kwesi Agbe?
Well, I see a phenomenon running across this continent with the youth. There's what I call the death of ideology.
It was very different from those days on student campuses now. Nobody's talking about ideology
The
now.
only ideology we have now is to look for money.
and Christianity.
Yeah.
Or religion.
Yeah, religion.
Religion.
Those two things.
Religion and money.
Yes, and I think...
But it's changing a bit.
Well, I think the next generation should hunger for knowledge. And as he rightly said, it's our duty now to educate them, because they are very ignorant about the history of this continent, the history of this country. Everything else is just about how to prosper and make myself rich very quick without working for it. Basically, you meet any young person, whether it's in the rural area or it's in the urban area, all they're looking for is money. And we would have to abandon that philosophy. There's death of patriotism. Nobody is patriotic anymore. Very few. Very few will put country first. Me first, me second, me third. And we need to abandon that if we want to change our societies. And we can do a lot. There's so much that can be done, so much change that can happen. And it's for them to learn and to be able to lead that change where we failed.
Thank you. And Yao Graham?
I think in addition to what they've said, really, a recognition that societal change is a product of collective action. It doesn't matter how bright you are, how brilliant your ideas, without getting involved with others, building organization, which also involves those who have the strongest interest in change. Because that's the lesson of the history. Whether it is Nkrumah's successful building of the CPP in a very short time, from when they arrived in 47 to 51, they had wiped out the UGCC. It was based on getting into recognizing what people wanted and building an organization rooted in those people. If you contrast it with what you're talking about, the wasted revolution, between from 76, when the struggle against the Champon government started, it developed into a national movement. Middle-class people in the associate and recognized professional bodies, the trade unions, the students, were united in a project of trying to make their country better. But you could see that there were different strands in it. It is that soil of ordinary people being energized and ready to work for change, which made it possible for a J. Rawlings figure to emerge. And the reason why this is important is that if you contrast what happened to that J. Rawlings' popularity and the hopes people invested in him, because of the absence of a movement rooted in the people and reflecting what they wanted, it ended up where it did, where Rawlings effectively became the representative of the same forces, where we've had the Fourth Republic today, which is taking us back to being a model of corruption and bad leadership.
Thank you, Dr. Yao Graham, Dr. Nicholas Atampugre, and Kwesi Agbe, for your very useful insights and reflections on this topic. I'm sure that this discussion is going to inspire a lot of conversations on Ghana's future. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And thank you all for joining us today. Please don't forget to subscribe to Graphic Online's YouTube channel and join us next time on Your Ghana, My Ghana for more thought-provoking discussions on Africa's development and progress. I am Dede Amanuel.